That's a lot of material.
We've been occupied actually for the last several months with doing our redesign and redevelopment of the website.
Yes.
So, but anyway, we're looking forward to that. Here's our plan. We don't know. It may not work out, but our plan has been that we would like to launch the newly developed site at the end of October, which is the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, the Luther thing.
Come to think of it,
and we are the 21st century Reformation, so
that's excellent. So 1517.
That's right.
Is the time. You're exactly right.
It's hard to believe that's 500 years.
I know.
Isn't that something?
It is remarkable. That's fascinating data. I hadn't thought of that.
And I'm still convinced that the ideals of the Reformation have not yet been realized.
They really have not. And their own cry in Latin was semper reformanda, we're always being reformed. But when you look at 30,000, 40,000 disagreeing denominations, surely anybody has to say, well, that's strange. I've got one Bible here. What is the cause of all of this confusion? With the Methodists meeting here and the Presbyterians down the street, and they're not talking to each other really. Something surely has gone wrong, hasn't it?
Something fundamental, I think.
I think it must be.
And fundamental in that we've allowed ourselves as Christians to get moved off of some of the most essential, basic issues of the faith.
Could it be the Shema? When you ask your friends, what's the Shema? They never heard of it. Well, that happens to be the greatest commandment, the Hear, O Israel. If you play with that, maybe you're doing damage to the system. That would be our theory.
It's sort of irreparable harm in a way. That
absolutely.
And unless we're willing to do the serious work of going back and revisiting those essentials, like the Shema.
Absolutely.
And the John 17:3, who is the only true God, which is the Father, of course.
Of course.
And Jesus as the Messiah. Though if you're off on those essentials and off on those basic things, then I don't think we should be surprised that everything's kind of a bit of mayhem.
It is.
And I think that's the case.
I think so. People are not defining the word Lord. They're not defining the word God. You mentioned the famous John 17:3. A child of 2 understands, you, Dad, are the only dad I have.
Right.
Supposing that to be the case. But with the Father, you, Father, are the only one who is the true God. That is as Jewish as you can get.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was thinking the other day, wasn't Jesus so obviously a Jew? I mean, they're taking him into the temple. This is Jewish to the core.
Absolutely. Wow.
It's amazing. This is a Jew with a unitary, I like that phrase, unitary monotheistic creed. But you ask people, you know about the Lord's Prayer, but what's the Lord's Creed? They don't know.
No,
they don't know.
And why not?
Why not?
That's right.
Challenging.
That's right. We have given a slight value to the things that Jesus gave the greatest value. And when you're talking about what he calls the most weighty things of all, it is the question of who is God.
Absolutely.
And who he is.
I would think so. And we know that Jews died, this Rabbi Akiva, who died with the word echad on his lips 3 o'clock in the afternoon, his last prayer. In other words, it mattered to Jews essentially. And I can see why, because God keeps saying, you're not listening. I'm the one who sets the rules. If I created the universe, I have a right to say how it's supposed to be run. But you're not listening. Yeah. And they never did. Then they had to be punished and then brought back and punished over and over again. They couldn't get the one God thing straight.
Which I think, too, is a good point that, and Paul makes this point, I think, actually, in Romans, that we as Gentile Christians should not take stock in ourselves, realizing that if those folks, those people who were the original folks, so to speak, those natural seed of Abraham, if they could be found lacking in great things, and they were, then we as Gentile Christians shouldn't go around with our nose in the air as though we're something, We too can be wrong.
Anti-Semitic to the core. We know about anti-Semitism.
Oh, yes.
So, no, these are very interesting preliminary remarks. So our thesis is that from the 2nd century, the leadership in the church changed dramatically. All the leaders in the early church, most of the New Testament writers, probably not Luke, who was a Gentile, but the rest of them are Jews.
Right.
But when we look at the 2nd century, guess what has happened? The church has fallen into Gentile hands.
Exactly.
What if they then imported their Greek philosophy? Justin was a philosopher, Justin Martyr. And what happened then? They wrecked the first commandment. Now where are we? We aren't back to where we should be yet.
Absolutely not. And I don't care what we do by way of reformation, until we address those central issues, then we're going to be failing. And I really believe that.
I believe so.
And I know that has been the heart behind much of your work with Restoration Fellowship.
Same idea.
And our 21st century Reformation is a call to say, we are not done with this reforming business. Right. We need to be working on this still.
I think that's a reasonable quest for all of us. It's not just a boring, so-called boring doctrine. Let's argue about words. No. We're not arguing about minor things here.
Right.
When Jesus is asked by a Jew, what is the greatest of all the commandments? Isn't that brilliant that Mark has a Jew talking to Jesus? I love that. So now the struggle is, if you ask somebody in an evangelical church, is that creed that Jesus gave a Unitarian monotheistic creed or a Trinitarian creed? They don't want to say. Because if they say Trinitarian, that makes the Jew who asked the question Trinitarian. Well, that's pushing it a bit to say that Israel was Trinitarian without knowing it. I mean, that's if you say it's a Unitarian creed, you say, well, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to be following Jesus. Why aren't we Unitarians? I don't know. This subject hasn't got started yet. How do we get this conversation going? Well, you're doing a lot with your television skills here, but the conversation hasn't got started yet, has it?
It's the heart of people that is tested by their love of the Word. And if I want to gloss over the words of Jesus, who is supposed to be my Lord, and I disregard, devalue his words about the greatest commandment in Mark 12:29, or who the only true God is in John 17:3, or even think of, look at this, the thing with Peter, 16, Matthew 16:16.
Absolutely.
These are solid, and this is, in Jesus is confirming in the Matthew 16 that this is what his congregation, his people, his assembly will be built upon. And
it doesn't get any more fundamental than that. And it's not a boring doctrinal question. People say, well, teach me how to have a Christian life. You start with getting the truth about God and Jesus.
That's right.
And we haven't got there yet. Look at all the chaos. I just investigated a leading evangelical site this last week, and I asked the question flat out, if I'm not a Trinitarian, am I a Christian? The answer is plainly, you are not. You cannot be a non-Trinitarian and be a Christian. You've got the wrong God. I'm thinking, how have we ever gotten this mess? We need to do something desperately.
It's laughable if it wasn't so serious, but that's how far amok that our Christian perspectives have gone, and it's sad.
It is sad.
I hate that. I just, it doesn't really frustrate me or anger me anymore. It just makes me laugh when I hear people saying things like that.
Absolutely. So we're trying to find striking ways of making our point. Asking whether Paul or Jesus was a Trinitarian is like saying, well, what sort of software did Paul or Jesus have on their computer?
That's right.
It's actually a silly question. But what's so amazing to me is that I've been collecting from scholars. Not that scholars are always good believers, but they are smart enough to look at the text and say, well, this is what it says.
Right.
And does everyone really believe that the Trinity is biblical? Obviously not. And this assemblage of statements from the top people at Yale and Harvard, Oxford and Cambridge, they obviously say, look, the New Testament is not Trinitarian. There's one here where he says, anybody with a modicum of historical sense knows that Paul was not a Trinitarian, would have been puzzled at those terms, wouldn't have understood what it was even. Well, come on, public, why isn't that exciting and thrilling information?
And which is to show that anyone who can free themselves, even briefly, from a biased Trinitarian historical traditional perspective, will immediately begin to see this.
Absolutely.
And actually, the Trinitarian perspective on things is probably the very first thing that begins to collapse. If anyone ever begins to read their Bible fairly, honestly, and without bias, it begins to collapse.
It shrieks
right
at
away.
you.
Oh,
yes, we were talking about this just before we started filming here, but the leading exponent of Trinitarianism, Millard Erickson, the concessions that he makes to me are staggering. I feel like saying, if he were in the room, do you hear what you're saying here? He says, in order to express the idea of the Trinity, sometimes he says, as a leading Trinitarian, I have to break the rules of grammar. I have to say, he are three, and they is one. I can hardly say it. But I'm saying, my dear man, please, listen to yourself. Does the God of all intelligence, revealing himself in Scripture, require us to say that sort of silly thing? I would think obviously not. But it's this paralyzing grip of tradition. What would my pastors, my friends say? I might lose my job as a pastor if I said that God is one rather than three.
That's right.
The pressures are enormous.
Oh, yes. And always have been.
Always have been.
Going way back into early post-biblical times.
That's right.
Tremendous pressure by the church hierarchy, and also then by the political hierarchy. And so
that's really when it got tough. When the sword came in from the state, we've got a situation where those early church fathers are actually condemning the creed of Jesus.
Yes.
That's amazing to me. Carlos, my son-in-law, has been doing some reading there, and they clearly don't like the unitary monotheistic creed of Jesus, and they say they don't like it. We don't want that Jewish thing, they say, but we don't want the polytheism of the pagan world. So somewhere in the middle, there's a hodgepodge mixture of everything. That's the Trinity. But when the church itself is condemning Jesus' own creed, then you can ask your Methodist friends or other denomination, when you go to church on Sunday and before God and man you say, I believe in the Son who was begotten, not made, and you ask them in a very friendly way, what does that mean? They haven't got the slightest idea. Begotten, not made. What that actually means in the creeds is eternally begotten, which itself is a fog term. But begotten, not made, they don't know what they're saying. Didn't Jesus say something about, in vain they worship, teaching things learned by rote? That's where it gets me a little scary.
Yes, exactly. Wow.
Anyway,
well,
the topic's worth exploring.
Indeed, I think it's one. We can spend a lifetime working just on some of these central verses and scriptures and points. I think we are spending a lifetime on that.
I find it endlessly interesting because of the people you meet.
That's right.
From every denomination imaginable who are saying, "My goodness, thanks for pointing that out. I'm seeing things now I never saw in the Bible before." Well, join the club. You're a miracle if you do.
When you think the haze, the fog is so thick, it's a marvel to me that anybody can see through it, and yet it's so buoying that they do see through it. People are seeing through it. And many times, if they have it pointed out to them, they say, I always knew there was something wrong with this other business.
That's very true. And, yes, that's the story you get often. People will write or phone and say, look, I was a Catholic all my upbringing. But when the nun was trying to draw the Trinity on the whiteboard, or the blackboard, I wasn't getting it. And all these years, I've had this nagging feeling. And then they come across a unitary monotheistic site, yours or mine, or Sean Finnegan, and others, and the book by Eric Chang. My own translations attempt to do the same thing in the commentary and so on. What if the word God actually means the Father? And what if the word Lord means the Lord Messiah? That's Luke 2:11. Today, here's the birth certificate. Today is born in the city of Bethlehem the one who is the Messiah Lord. Christos Kyrios in Greek. Not the God Lord. Nobody thought God could get born in those days. Nobody thought God could die. But now look where we are.
Wow.